My name's Dawn Dickens and I work for the Manx Wildlife Trust. Now I've been doing a series on every Friday morning just finding out a bit more about our fantastic wildlife. And today, instead of being at my kitchen table, we have come out to the lovely Ramsey Beach. So if we just scan around and see how beautiful that is. And I've come here because for one, we can get out for a little bit longer now with the restrictions easing slightly. But I also want to talk about this stuff. This lovely seaweed. Now, I know seaweed isn't everyone's cup of tea, but this is absolutely fantastic stuff. Yes, it is a plant. It's an algae. It does not have tubes in it like a plant in your garden. So it doesn't need those tubes to carry the nutrients around because, hey, when the tide's in, the nutrients in the water and it's all around it. So we can have a little look at this jumbled mass just here, and you can see how this seaweed seems totally random and twisted around. Okay, this is called spiral rack, and this is a very clever ploy by this seaweed. If I just lift up a piece here, you'll see just how wet it still is on the underside, and by twisting around it creates more shade and that stops it from drying out. Here's another really common seaweed and very slippy. If you've ever been on the beach and you've walked over this stuff, you'll know this. So this is something called gutweed. Can you see how stringy it is? Okay. Now, gutweed, if you like rock pooling, this is the sort of stuff you need to avoid, because gutweed is a seaweed that doesn't mind it being less saline. That's less salt in the water. It can cope with it. And actually, if we look just up here, you can see why. Okay, can you see that water running down the wall? That's fresh water runoff from the land. And so it's really almost like fresh water here. And this weed can cope with it. Gutweed? Why is it called gutweed? Well, it's almost like long stringy bags. I don't know if you can see on the end of my finger there. And what happens is when the tide comes in, these are full of air and they look just like your guts, your intestines twisting around. We'll have a look at that underneath the microscope a bit later. Have a look at this lovely seaweed here. Can you see this? And if you look, can you see there's these funny egg-shaped bumps? Okay, this is egg rack, and these egg-shaped bumps are actually air bubbles, like balloons. Very clever way, because when the tide's in, the seaweed would be underneath water. Now, you know, when you go to the swimming pool, the deep end is a darker blue looking. That's because the light is getting absorbed and it's not going all the way down to the bottom. So this seaweed wants to get as much light on it as it can. It's just like a plant, it needs to photosynthesize. So those air bubbles help it to float right up towards the surface of the water. The other interesting thing with this is not all these things are air bubbles. There, if you have a close look at this, can you see it's very dimpled? It's got a slightly different coloured. This is actually a spore sac. Okay, so this is how seaweeds reproduce. They don't flower like a plant. So, egg rack, fantastic seaweed. So what we've got here is an incredibly long piece of seaweed. You can see down here it's got one main rib running down it, and on either side it's almost like it's gathered in. This is really big. I'll just put my welly just beside it so you can have a good look at it. You can see how long it is. These kelp seaweeds don't grow near the shore. They grow further off the shore, usually below the low water mark. They make fantastic forests where lots of fish hide in nurseries. So this is Dabilocks, incredibly long and straight and thin. This is another of those incredibly long one blade seaweeds. And I just put my welly back here. You can see how incredibly long it is. This one, if we look a little bit closer, can you see, instead of having that midrib running down the middle, we've now just got sort of like a very dimpled zone with these like ruffled bits on either side. This seaweed is known as sugar kelp, and yes, people did used to use it as a sugar substitute, but really you've got to get an acquired taste for it. I've come right up to the high water mark now, and I found this lovely seaweed called oarweed, and this is fantastic. It really shows you the structure of these seaweeds. So with this long part down here is called the stipe. So you'd imagine it very like the stem of a flower, but of course it doesn't have those tubes running up it to transfer all the nutrient. And at the bottom here, it looks so much like roots, but they aren't roots. They don't absorb nutrients. Well, literally what they do is they grow around stones and things to help hold the seaweed to the seabed. Just like its name suggests, it's a hold fast. If you're a seaweed, the worst thing that could happen to you is for the waves to wash you up the beach and then back down, because all that's going to happen is you're going to break up into tiny pieces. And if you follow this stipe all the way up, you come up to what's called the blades here, and you can see they're almost like fingers coming out. But what's fantastic on this is if we get a little bit closer, can you see that funny patterning? That's a tiny little marine animal called a sea mat, and we're going to take a piece of that back with us and have a little look at it. The other seaweed that I found quite close by, I'm just going to place it just here so you can see, very bright green, which is very unusual because the seaweeds we've been looking at so far are all brown coloured, and most of our seaweeds are this brown colour. This one is called sea lettuce, and it's incredibly thin. It doesn't have much structure. It doesn't have a stipe. That's that long piece, remember? It just literally attaches straight onto the rocks by a disc. So this is sea lettuce, and it does look very like that lettuce. You know when you buy lettuce and you have a bag of lettuce in your fridge, you forget about it and it goes a bit limp and a bit sad. It does look very like that. Okay, so we come back into my kitchen and I brought back the seaweed with me, and I just wanted to have a closer look at it. Can you remember I said, I wanted to have a look at some of the things under the microscope. So just to remind ourselves of the seaweeds that we found. So can you remember this really thin, flimsy green one, which is called sea lettuce? It is so fine, and you can see through it almost. It's only 2 cells thick. And then we've got these lovely brown kelps, and of course I brought back some gutweed. I just think it's such a fantastic name. And we were going to have another look, can you remember, at this funny stuff that looks like a mesh stuck onto the blades of the oarweed, which is called sea mat. So we're going to have a look at that underneath the microscope. All those little tiny rectangles all contain a tiny little animal called a zooid. Each one is individual, and when they reproduce, it's almost like they're stamping out the exact image of themselves. Because this is rectangular, it's a different species. And we're having a good look here at the gutweed, and here you can see it's a very distinct bag. Those edges are actually curled over, and if you look carefully you'll see little bits of water inside them and little air bubbles. So you can imagine these inflated up into a big long sausage, which is why it's called gutweed, just like your intestine. So we're looking at the sea mat again, and can you see those tiny little hairs that are sticking up? This is a different sort of sea mat called an Electra pilosa. And instead of having the rectangular holes, it tends to have more oval-shaped holes. So those little bits sticking up are part of its reproduction. So I'm going to show you some fun things to do with seaweed. Please, if you take anything off the seashore, like shells or seaweed, just really double check that there's nothing else living on it, and only take a small amount, because this stuff is important. The seaweed that goes on our shore is where we get sandhoppers and flies lay their eggs, and then the birds come and eat them. So it's very important we never take lots away from outside. So what you'll need, this is a bit of fun, is you need quite a thin seaweed. It's no point taking one of the thick kelps that are thick and waxy, because this won't work on those. But literally, if you look around, sometimes you can just find some really bright red seaweed called dogs as well on the seashore. And literally, we're just going to press it, just like you would a flower. So all you need is some paper, absorbent paper, okay? I'm going to just spread it out on here so it's not all scrumpled up. Close that up, and then put a couple of really thick books on top of it. Leave it about a week, and then when we come back, we should have that lovely dried out seaweed, and hopefully it will keep its nice bright colour. The other thing that we're going to do is a bit of cooking, really. Make sure that your parents are with you when you do this, because it does involve boiling water. So we talked about the seaweed, and we said most of our seaweeds are brown. They still have chlorophyll in them, that little work engine that takes the sunlight and converts it. Algae is fantastic at making oxygen. Everyone always thinks trees fantastic, but actually a lot of oxygen comes from algae, from seaweeds, algae in the sea, and it could be phytoplankton, it could be these bigger algae, okay? So it's really, really incredibly important stuff to us. So that chlorophyll is in there, chlorophyll, but we can't see it. We know chlorophyll gives this lovely green colour. What happens when we boil up little pieces of seaweed is they will go bright green as well. So we're just going to test that out. So now I've come over and I put on a pan of water to boil, and now you can just see the steam beginning to come off it to see whether there really is chlorophyll hidden in these seaweeds. So I've got a little bit of oarweed here that's going to go in the pot. You can see that was brown, very typical brown kelp seaweed. This is the spiral rack that's going to go in. And oh my word, that was instant. This has gone bright green already. I've got a bit of the egg rack that's gone in with the air bubble. And of course a very, very brown looking sugar kelp. That's it. And also Dabilocks. So literally just put them in. My word, there's a very strong smell of the sea coming off here at the moment. And if I hold it up, you'll see straight away. So this one, let's see if I can take that off. I don't want to burn myself. So that one was a sugar kelp, and it's gone bright green. So it worked on that one. This one, my goodness, is the Dabilocks. Can you see the mid-rib? Oops, sorry about that. Just running down the middle. That's gone bright green. We've got the spiral rack. That went bright green as soon as I put it in the water. And this is the egg rack. There, you can see the egg there. That's gone green as well. And the very last one, and this is taking a little bit more time to go green, but it is green, okay, that was the oarweed. Now, seaweeds have been eaten by people for quite some time, especially in the Asian countries. And it's very, very good for you. There's a lot of iodine in them, and it's a very important part of the diet in places of the world like that. We can eat some of our seaweeds. Some of them, like the kelps, are a bit tough, and you really won't want to be eating them. And certainly if you get lava bread, that's a seaweed that almost looks like a black bin bag that's stretched over rocks. That takes about 10 hours to cook, but they are edible. Please, please, if you do go out foraging for seaweed, like I said, please don't take loads, leave some for the wildlife, and check where you're picking it up from, because obviously people walk their dogs on the beach and that they could pee on the seaweed, which wouldn't be very pleasant. And also if it's near to an outfall of any kind. So be very careful what you pick up, but have a little go at it. Try eating a bit of seaweed. We use agar from the seaweed in a lot of food products. So things like, if you like panna cotta pudding, it helps that set. And also, not many people know this, but it's actually put into toothpaste as well. So seaweed might be slippery, might be slimy, might be smelly, but it's incredibly interesting stuff.